Hi, welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Laura.
If you're just joining us for part 2 in the story of Blair Adams, if you haven't listened to part 1, go listen to that first and then come join us for part 2. As a very quick, small recap, here's where we left off. Blair Adams believed someone was trying to kill him, and he ran across an entire continent trying to get away. But in July of 1996, he was found dead in a Knoxville parking lot. He had been beaten to death. There was gold, cash, money, jewelry lying around untouched all over the crime scene. No robbery and no obvious suspects right away. Blair's body was sent to the University of Tennessee Medical Center for an autopsy. The results painted a picture of a violent struggle. Blair had numerous cuts, scrapes, and abrasions on his body, on his hands, arms, and elsewhere. Some of these wounds were defensive injuries, meaning Blair had his arms up trying to fend off blows. His hand, in particular, was in bad shape. One hand had a deep cut and was blackened with bruising and what looked like road rash, as if it had been forcefully scraped along pavement. This suggested that Blair was knocked to the ground or dragged at some point, grinding his hand into the ground. Clumps of Blair's own hair were found ripped out, indicating that someone had grabbed and yanked his hair during a fight. The actual cause of death was determined to be a severe abdominal injury. Blair suffered a violent blow to his stomach. Something with tremendous force struck him in the stomach so hard that it ruptured his internal organs. In fact, isn't that horrific?
Yeah.
His stomach was perforated, so torn open by this blow, leading to massive internal bleeding and ultimately septic shock, which is a deadly bloodstream infection. Essentially, the trauma to his abdomen was catastrophic, and he likely died within hours from internal injuries. The fact that they say within hours just is so horrific.
Yeah, it really is. And it's awful too, because it does mean that it was hours. He probably laid there in agony for a while, which is so sad.
It's so sad. If only someone had come by. I mean, I don't know if that would have saved him, but it's heartbreaking.
It was really heartbreaking.
The medical examiner noted that it would take an extreme amount of force to cause that kind of injury, more than just a punch. It could have been a kick or being struck by a blunt object, possibly even being hit by a vehicle's bumper, and we'll come back to that theory. Along with the abdominal blow, Blair also had a significant wound on his forehead. There was a large gash that appeared to come from a blunt instrument, possibly a crowbar or a club, according to investigators. So he was hit in the head and the stomach during this assault. Another disturbing detail from the autopsy, Blair showed signs of a sexual assault. The exact nature of these signs haven't been publicly detailed, either to preserve investigative secrecy or maybe due to their sensitive nature. There was no semen found and no DNA, blood, or anything bodily fluid to tie whoever did this to the crime. There was one thing, though. Perhaps the most crucial piece of forensic evidence recovered was clutched in Blair's own hand, a long strand of hair that did not belong to him. When Blair's body was found, one of his hands, the one that was cut and blackened, was found gripping a long strand of someone else's hair. This suggests that Blair fought tooth and nail against his attacker and managed to grab a chunk of their hair, literally yanking it out during the struggle.
Perfect. Were investigators able to get any DNA from that hair? Great that he grabbed that so they can hopefully find something.
I was literally thinking about your comment in our Lindsay case recently about grabbing hair or something when I was finalizing, this. The hair was tested for DNA, but unfortunately in 1996, DNA testing was not as advanced as today. They were able to determine it was not Blair's hair and that it likely came from someone with long hair, possibly a woman, although, men can have long hair too. At the time, they couldn't identify the person. And that strand of hair is the only physical evidence whoever did this left behind. It means the answer might literally exist in a database, just one that they couldn't find at the time. And decades later, it still hasn't led to a match.
Could they possibly solve it with like genealogy or something now that we have more advanced testing?
If the sample is usable, let's hope if it had the root, they can run it through the DNA databases. And like we said, there hasn't been a hit yet, but it could be a candidate for DNA genealogy testing. So far, that hasn't happened. And I don't know if that's because it doesn't have what they need to run it through that, or if they're waiting for technology to advance even further. Forensic techs did scour the construction site. They did not find a murder weapon left at the scene. Given the nature of Blair's injuries, they suspected something like a heavy club, a tire iron, a crowbar, or even a piece of construction rebar that was in the area. Any of those things might have been used. They actually tested several pieces of rebar from the site to see if any had blood or tissue or anything on them, and all of those tests came up empty. If the attacker used a weapon, they took it with them or discarded it elsewhere. There was also the possibility, as some investigators later theorized, that no handheld weapon was used for the fatal blow. They thought maybe it might have been the bumper of a car, like Blair could have been run into by a vehicle. There was no direct evidence at the scene of a car hit, like no skid marks or obvious vehicle debris, but that idea would come up when reconstructing the event later on.
Could he have been hit by a car and then dragged to that site? I guess maybe
That's
you
what
would have
I've
seen something on
wondered
the
too.
road, but maybe they moved
Maybe
him.
because they did say all of the road rash on that one hand,
Yeah. But I'm like,
you
if they hit
wonder
him and put him in their car and took him somewhere,
his hand could have been dragging
well,
if they
even if
didn't
they
close
pulled
the
him out of the
door.
car and dragged him to the
Yeah,
site, because if it
possibly.
was
Yeah,
a woman, I don't know what his body type was. Maybe they couldn't carry him. I don't, not very well, maybe.
possibly. Right. It's kind of crazy that they're not sure even what was used to kill him or if it was one person or multiple people, their genders. I mean, nothing.
Was there a lot of blood at the site? Like the attack took place there, like for his head wound? And was
It
it in
seems
that same area?
it seems like there was blood from his head wound, but that they couldn't tell if the attack had happened there or if his head had just continued to bleed when he was left there. And
Yeah.
then his internal injuries or like his hand, none of it conclusively said that the attack happened there or that it didn't happen there.
Was there any signs around that area that they could find that it might have happened somewhere else, or they didn't find anything?
They didn't find anything,
Hmm.
which kind of leads me to think that it was in that parking lot, the whole attack, even if some verbal altercation or something happened somewhere else and then moved there. But the fact that they didn't find evidence anywhere else, it seems like it had
Yeah.
to happen there. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Hmm.
The autopsy also confirmed what Gerald Sapp, our tow truck driver, suspected. Blair had no drugs or alcohol whatsoever in his system. That put to rest any notion that this was perhaps a drug deal gone wrong or that Blair was hallucinating due to substances. He was stone cold sober when he died. Whatever paranoia or behaviors that he was exhibiting, they weren't because of other substances. So, either due to something going on with his mental health or reaction to a very real threat. Interestingly, despite Blair's apparent either paranoia or his erratic behavior, there's no evidence that he was formally dealing with any kind of mental health issues. He had never been diagnosed with any psychiatric condition, as far as family and his medical records show. So, if he was suffering from something like a psychotic break or delusions, it hadn't been recognized clinically before. And maybe had he lived, he might have been diagnosed later, but that's all purely speculative. One final clue from the night of the murder: a security guard who was working at a business near the site reported hearing a scream around 3:30 a.m. on July 11th. This guard initially thought it was a woman's scream. He said that it was high pitched and abrupt. He looked around, he didn't see anything, and he didn't call police at the time because he wasn't entirely sure what he had heard or even where it came from. Investigators believe that this very well could have been the moment that Blair was attacked and killed. If Blair let out a scream in terror or pain, maybe it was high pitched enough in that panic and to a distant listener that it sounded female. Alternately, it's possible there was a female present who screamed. If, say, a woman was involved in luring or attacking him, we don't know for sure, but the timing fits. Investigators think that Blair likely died sometime in the pre dawn hours, and his body was discovered just 4 hours later. Sadly, if the guard had called 911 when he heard that scream, maybe officers might have responded and found Blair sooner, but that's hindsight. At the time, nothing came of that scream. The Knoxville County Sheriff's Office launched an intensive investigation into Blair's death, but they were immediately hampered by the sheer, weirdness of the case. Here was a Canadian man, thousands of miles from his home in British Columbia, found murdered in Knoxville, Tennessee, a place where, as far as anyone could tell, he had no contacts, no business, and no reason to be there.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking about this earlier. If he was scared of something in Canada and he was running, and maybe this was something that happened at the wrong place at the wrong time. What if this was like a crime of opportunity where he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time? And because why Knoxville? How could that have happened for whatever was going on in Canada to follow him so far, all these changes in location all the way to Knoxville? It's just wild.
It is. And that is one of the biggest mysteries in this case because there is no known reason. Investigators and local sheriff's detectives, and eventually agents from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the TBI, and the FBI had to retrace Blair's steps across two countries to even understand how he got there. And when they did, they found that the way he arrived made as little sense as the way he died. And it doesn't feel very easy for someone to have chased him all of that way.
Yeah,
He
that's what I
drove
was thinking
so
too.
much. Mhm.
Yeah. Also, maybe because he was so paranoid, he got himself into this situation just because he was trying to get away from something. And it's so unfortunate he didn't tell anybody what that was in Canada.
Right.
If he would
And
have talked to somebody, they could have helped him. But being sleep deprived, traveling so far, driving so far. I know after I drive 10, 12 hours, I'm
mhm.
exhausted. I've driven 12 hours by myself straight through, and you feel just out of it when you get there, especially after travel, flying, changing time
Yeah.
zones. I'm sure he wasn't in a good place mentally, even without all that paranoia going on in the background.
Well, and I think if he hadn't have told people that he was scared someone was chasing him and he hadn't done all of that travel, it would have been wrapped up as a crime of opportunity. And
Yeah.
I think it's because everything before his murder is documented,
Yeah.
the questions are greater. I,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
Well, and it's hard to not feel like this was something that he was running from. Someone was chasing him because of all the things he was
Right.
saying and what he was doing.
And that's where it takes you back to, okay, then maybe this was targeted and specific to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
But then you think how hard it would be to follow him that far.
And
It's
why?
mhm. And
Why is
why?
someone following him?
Yeah. There's a couple theories that we'll dig into, but none of them are great. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very so many questions. Investigators collected the evidence at the scene, which we've covered. There was not very much. And that's where also, when you think about a crime of opportunity, it's more chaotic and there is forensics left behind. But in this case, there was just that one hair. There's no weapon, there's no blood or DNA, like anything else except that
Well,
one hair.
that's why I was kind of thinking if it had happened somewhere else, if they hit him, put him in their car because there was signs of other assault going on. If that happened somewhere
Mhm.
else, that's why the DNA
Yes.
is not there. And then they took him and left him there. Maybe they were searching him for drugs or something, and that's why
Mhm.
they left all this stuff, everything else there. They didn't care to have that stuff on them. I'm sure if you take gold bars and then people are depositing gold bars and they know that he had that, that would be easier to find that person, I think, and the
Yeah, but the
jewelry and things like
cash,
that. But the
uh,
cash, I don't know why you wouldn't take that unless they were looking for drugs and they were maybe high. Maybe they just cared
possibly.
about the drugs but I don't know why you wouldn't take the money.
Right.
But that's why I was thinking if they had put him in the car, attacked him there basically, and then left him at this other place, that
Mhm.
could explain why there wasn't more evidence
At this
found there.
Yeah, that does make a lot more sense for why there wasn't any other evidence. I was thinking, like, if it were today, say he had something on, like, an SD card. I
Hmm.
was trying to think of when, I mean, was it still floppy disks back then? I remember having SD cards, like, in the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, I remember floppy disks.
When did SD
Um,
cards come out? Or a hard drive, like a thumb drive or
some kind of
something.
yeah. It says that the M3 Super Disk was introduced in 1996, which is a floppy disk.
What? Is that
Mhm.
just like a higher powered one?
Higher capacity alternative.
Mm.
It could hold up to 120 to 140 megabytes instead of 1.4, which was the normal alternative before that.
That's so wild to think about when our recordings are like 2 gig.
I know. It says they were, well, still heavily used. The massive boom in sales began to decline around that time as internet usage and file size increased.
Mm.
So they were still in use in 96.
He could have
But
had
CDs
information
and
or something.
yeah, CDs and early zip drives were starting at that time, but they still were
Oh,
widely used.
so he could have had that too, maybe?
It could have had some information on there.
But if he had information or something they were looking for, maybe they did find that and they did get what they wanted. Maybe he had
Maybe,
knowledge of something that he wasn't supposed to,
maybe they
possibly.
did follow him.
Yeah. As they worked to piece together Blair's final day, they had more questions than answers. And one big question is exactly what we've been talking about. Was someone actually chasing Blair, or was that all in his head? Remember, Blair had repeatedly told friends he was in danger. He even specified to some that he feared that someone wanted him dead. In one instance, he hinted that the threat was coming from former coworkers from that Germany project he had worked on. Apparently, some of those guys had recently returned to Canada, and for some reason, Blair was scared of them. Investigators did look into this. They checked out those coworkers. They also looked into any personal enemies that Blair might have had. They found nothing concrete to tie those individuals to Knoxville. There was no evidence of anyone from Blair's circle, friends, coworkers, family, tracking him down. Canadian and German authorities helped run down interviews with Blair's friends, that girlfriend in Germany, any other ex girlfriends, colleagues. None of them indicated a specific person who they found. that had it in for Blair in any way that would result in this cross continental assassination. The fact that Blair's cash and gold were left behind suggested that robbery wasn't a motive, or at least not a successful one.
Do you think they could have left that behind because something happened mid attack and they decided to just leave?
Absolutely. I mean, noise, the scream we talked about, maybe potential witnesses driving by, maybe they saw a cop car drive by. Any of that could have spooked them and they fled. I also do think we didn't have an inventory of what Blair had on him. Just because they didn't take the cash doesn't mean there wasn't something else of value that they were looking for.
Or that they didn't
What
take half of what he had?
That's true too. Exactly. I don't think there was an inventory on his safety deposit box. So
Yeah.
we don't know exactly how much cash, or maybe he had more gold than that and they got spooked, like you said, midway through and grabbed some and left,
Yeah.
possibly. Investigators did really lean into the fact that they thought the signs of sexual assault implied a possible sexual motive, or at least some kind of situation that turned violent. The focus shifted to the idea that Blair's death might have resulted from an encounter with a stranger in Knoxville, perhaps something to do with a sex worker or some kind of scam. Personally, it feels like that might have been to throw off investigators, but I'm not sure. It seems weird that he would be so paranoid and so worried about somebody tracking him down and hurting him that he would then go out to have a random encounter with someone he didn't know. I don't know.
Yeah. That does feel very random.
Mhm. One theory the detectives, though, explored heavily was that Blair fell victim to a crime of opportunity involving sex workers in the Knoxville area. The location where Blair was killed was near a known truck stop that, in the mid 90s, was a hotspot for sex worker activity. Truckers coming through often would meet with sex workers there. The sheriff at the time, J.J. Jones, later said, "We thought that he picked somebody up over there." Perhaps Blair was feeling lonely. That's what investigators were trying to figure out. Maybe he was looking for some kind of company in the middle of the night and approached somebody at that truck stop. He might have offered to pay, and being that he was flashing around money, remember, he tried to pay for the cheap motel with $100 bills and didn't even care about the change. Someone could have targeted him as an easy mark, a guy with a lot of cash who's seemingly on his own here. If Blair then went with this person to a more secluded spot, that could have been the setup for a robbery.
Seems like if it would have been set up for a robbery, they would have taken all the cash at least. You know, I don't know if it is
Agreed.
that random. Like we talked about how unlucky that he had been so scared of something going on and then something did still happen to him.
Horrifyingly unlucky. Statistically, it's very possible, but everything leading up to this is just, it would be horrifyingly unlucky if he were the victim of a crime of opportunity after feeling like he was being targeted and watched and somebody wanted him dead.
Yeah. And maybe his paranoia made him go into situations like put himself places where he wouldn't normally be. If he was walking
Mm,
around at night in Knoxville, which we know he left the hotel on foot,
yeah.
he was seen late. He doesn't know where he is. He could have been
Hmm.
in a not good part of town
And had no
walking
idea.
around. And if he's thinking someone's following him, maybe he's trying to hide, like run through alleys or go places where you normally wouldn't go if you weren't paranoid that someone was following you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It seemed like he pulled off to get gas, got out of his car. Then he was trying to use the wrong key. So he thought his car wouldn't work. It wasn't a planned stop in a place that he planned to stay.
Hmm.
And Gerald Sapp, who took him to the hotel, he's just taking him to the closest place for one night
Yeah.
so that he can find the right key and get his car and continue on his way. So it absolutely could have been a more dangerous area.
Well, and let's be honest, places that are hot spots for sex workers are not going to be the best parts of town. There
No.
is likely going to be more crime and more things there that you're not going to go
Yeah.
walking around at 1 o'clock in the morning in those areas.
And he didn't have his car. So he was walking around. We don't know where exactly he ate at. We have the
Yeah.
sighting at the Cracker Barrel, but he could have been doing, I mean, anything. He could have been looking
Yeah.
for his key. Maybe he thought he lost it or someone
Yeah.
took it. Yeah.
And maybe someone did follow him there. And if they saw him with somebody at the Cracker Barrel, I don't know.
Right.
It does kind of feel like how the scene was that they were looking for something on him, but also that could have been a distraction. And maybe they took half of what he had and left him there. I don't know.
Right.
Because why leave all the money? Like, I
Right.
don't know.
It just doesn't make sense. Even if you're trying to stage it to look like something else and you didn't care about the money, it still seems like you would take the money
I know. Even
just to
the
make it
the
look like a
construction
robbery
workers.
gone wrong. Yeah, right. Even if you toss it over a bridge, like you would still take it to make it look like this was a crime of opportunity and a robbery,
A robbery. Yep.
unless they were interrupted, I guess.
Yeah.
Several suspects over the years were indeed people with histories of sex work in that area. Detectives interviewed known sex workers and their associates who were active in East Knoxville at the time. They asked if any of them recalled seeing Blair or if they had met with a Canadian tourist that night. Had they heard anyone brag or have rumors about an incident? All of their questions, unfortunately, did not lead to a smoking gun. There were no persons of interest, nothing that could be proven, no DNA, no witnesses willing to talk. Investigators pieced together a hypothetical scenario that Blair might have solicited a sex worker during the encounter. Something went wrong. Maybe Blair changed his mind, or maybe someone was watching and they decided to rob him. Perhaps Blair resisted the robbery. He fought back when attacked, and the situation escalated. It could have started as a simple mugging that turned into a beating when Blair fought back. Maybe somebody was watching the situation and jumped in to subdue Blair and inflicted the injuries. One line of thinking, championed by cold case investigator Dave Davenport years later, is that the assault happened in or around a vehicle, like you mentioned. For instance, maybe Blair and the other person might have been sitting in a car. Then something made Blair panic. Perhaps he thought he was being set up and a struggle ensued. Davenport speculated that the attacker could have struck Blair on the head with a heavy object, causing that forehead gash, and then, in an attempt to quickly incapacitate him, rammed him with the car or kicked him violently in the stomach. If it was a car, they might have knocked him down and hit him with the front bumper. Sheriff Jones, however, believed the fatal blow was more likely a powerful kick delivered by an assailant directly. Either way, Blair ends up on the ground severely wounded. The attacker possibly then yanks off Blair's pants, maybe looking for a hidden wallet around his waist. In the chaos, the money and valuables spill out everywhere. Maybe the attacker at that point does get spooked because maybe Blair screamed and they worry that someone might come. So they grab nothing or maybe just $1,000, some portion of what he had, and flee, leaving Blair there. It's speculative, but it fits many of the odd details, like the scattered money and the extreme violence of the blow, and even Blair's blackened hand, which could have been from hitting the pavement, consistent with being knocked either by a car or thrown hard to the ground. Of course, this is just one theory, and I still don't feel like it checks all the boxes. The investigators never found definitive proof that that is what happened. They never identified anyone specific who admitted that they were there and things got out of hand. In fact, over the years, every lead was exhausted without yielding a culprit. The Knox County Sheriff's Office even released a composite sketch early on of an unknown man hoping someone might recognize him. This sketch was based on those two women at Cracker Barrel who saw Blair with the man. Perhaps that man was involved. Maybe he wasn't. If they could find him, they thought they could crack the case. Unfortunately, no one ever came forward to identify the man in the sketch, and that individual remains unknown. Investigators also looked into Blair's background to ensure they weren't missing a motive. They verified that none of Blair's family or friends believed he was involved in anything illegal, no drug trafficking or anything like that. There was no evidence from phone records or travel records that Blair was meeting someone with any drug deal or secret purpose. When Blair's home and accounts were checked, nothing pointed to him arranging any kind of business or anything in Tennessee. Blair's actions seemed purely driven by his unnamed fear. And speaking of that fear, mental health was a quiet undercurrent in the investigation. While authorities publicly leaned towards external explanations, like their sex worker theory, they also considered that Blair might have been suffering from paranoia or delusions, and mental health was much less understood 30 years ago than today. Investigators learned from Blair's mom and his friends how oddly he'd been acting in the weeks prior.
Did the police think he was being chased, or did they lean more towards the delusion, paranoia side of things?
They really leaned more into the crime of opportunity or something had happened with his mental health. They never ruled out anything because they were never able to prove anything. Investigators had the theory that there was no pursuer at all as they were trying to track down what actually happened. They said that Blair could have been, quote, running away from himself, essentially fleeing a mental breakdown. If that was the case, then his death might have been the tragic coincidence that we talked about. He's in a random place. He's not thinking clearly. He encounters a dangerous individual who takes advantage of the situation. But then again, why wouldn't you take all of his money?
Yeah. There's so many
Every time,
questions about that. That's what it always comes back to for me too. Why would you leave all that money just scattered all over the ground? I
yeah,
could
for
see,
a
like I said,
random
not
crime
taking
of
the gold.
opportunity.
Yeah, not
Mhm.
taking the gold or the gold bars or the jewelry, because I think that could probably be tracked better than cash.
If they knew exactly what he had, but I don't know if they
Yeah.
even did.
But I wonder if they could have found out from his safety deposit box if there was an inventory
Maybe.
there of what he had. I
And
don't
he
know.
cleaned it out. So would
Mhm.
there have been a record of that? Or I'm
I
not
don't know.
sure.
I'm not sure either.
I'm
Was the money that was around him, was it US dollars or Canadian money?
both and
Both?
German.
Oh, kind of everything.
Yeah. I,
Maybe they just took the US currency that they could find and left
hmm
the rest if they didn't want to go through like trying to change the money.
right.
That's something
And that
too.
probably would have been more obvious if
Yeah.
somebody is going trying to turn in Canadian and German money.
Hmm.
Yeah.
If they knew that he had that, whatever they
hmm
could find from what he did
Yeah.
before he got there. But that might be a little more obvious if you find someone trading that money.
Yeah. Definitely.
So maybe they didn't, maybe if they did get spooked, they grabbed what US currency they could find and left the rest. But it
Yeah.
seems like there was still a good amount if the construction workers were taking hundreds off the
Yeah. There
ground.
were still hundreds. Yeah. Exactly. I think
So,
over $4,000 before the gold or jewelry or anything else like that. I don't know how much he had to begin with, though, because he cleaned out his savings account.
yeah, he's 31. He cleaned out everything he had basically and took it with him. I
Yeah,
mean, so much that they wouldn't let him cross the border. The first
exactly.
time it raised that
Right.
big of a red flag, his duffel bag
Yeah.
was probably full of money.
hmm
So they could have grabbed a good amount. Maybe they didn't have something really to put it in either,
Yeah, that's true.
depending
If
on the
there wasn't a
situation.
car around, yeah.
They stuffed their shirts
Uh,
and stuff. I don't know. They
Yeah.
could have done what they
Why
could
not just
carry and
take
left.
his duffel bag and his fanny pack? Why
Yeah,
go through them?
that's true too.
Because I feel like you could just dump that in a landfill and maybe never found it.
Yeah. Maybe they thought they were just trying to have as little things to track them to as possible. So if they only grabbed what they could carry and then left, I don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, true. Investigators thought, in other words, maybe Blair had put himself unintentionally in harm's way because of his mental state rather than someone following him and catching up to him. Local authorities even stated that they believed the threat that Blair felt was imaginary. They said a product of his own mind, and that his desperate journey to escape was from those inner demons. And that feels very specific, and it feels like you would need to know someone well to make that kind of statement. But maybe from everything they found, talking to friends, family, colleagues, everybody, they were able to. But whether real or imagined, Blair did end up dead just as he feared. By 1997, after several months, the case went cold. It received a bit of media attention. It was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, the classic TV show, in an episode that aired in April 1997. The national exposure brought in a flurry of tips from viewers, but none of them led to a breakthrough. Many people theorized and speculated, just like we're doing now, but no one had concrete information. The case sat unsolved for years. Detectives periodically reviewed it, especially when new technologies like the CODIS DNA database became available. They would check what they had against everything in the system, hoping for a match. They got nothing. And there was only one piece of foreign DNA, the hair. And so far, it's never matched anyone in the databases. In 2017, over 20 years after Blair's death, a journalist in Knoxville did an in depth feature on the case, re interviewing the investigators. The head of the Knox County Cold Case Unit still called it the most interesting and strangest case of his career. They admitted that no credible leads had emerged in decades. Essentially, they were waiting for a miracle, either DNA technology to advance enough to identify the hair, or someone, an accomplice, a witness, even the killer themselves, to come forward with information. They reportedly said that it will take someone giving them information to be able to solve this, underscoring that a confession or a tip is really what they need to crack this puzzle. So, where does the case sit now? Unfortunately, as of today, the murder of Blair Adams remains unsolved. It's a cold case in the truest sense. No arrests have ever been made. The Knox County Sheriff's Office continues to list Blair Adams in their cold case files. His full name is Robert Dennis Blair Adams. And they periodically remind the public the case is still open in hopes that someone someday will provide information. Investigators have essentially exhausted all leads. They chased down every witness who saw Blair on his journey from Canada to Knoxville and every possible suspect who was in that area at the time. But nothing solid panned out. And the physical evidence is scant. We had the hair that we talked about. There were also some fingerprints on Blair's belongings, but they either weren't complete fingerprints and also they were contaminated by the number of people who handled them before they were able to go get tested for fingerprints.
That's unfortunate.
Hmm. Blair's family back in Canada were left with grief and endless questions. His mother, Sandra, does not accept that Blair had any sort of mental breakdown. She believes that something external was threatening him. In an interview years after the murder, Sandra offered a perplexing new detail. She claimed that Blair's real reason for heading south was that he planned to attend the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. And Atlanta's about a 3 to 4 hour drive south of Knoxville. The Olympics were set to begin on July 19th, 1996, which was a week after Blair was killed. If Blair truly intended to go to Atlanta, he was pretty early And also, the way that he got there is just odd. You could have flown directly into Atlanta without
Yeah.
all of the or flown anywhere,
Anywhere
from
closer. Seems like,
Seattle to Atlanta or instead of DC. He was
yeah.
picking that flight in the moment.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's possible.
Well, and the trip to Germany. Like
Yes.
originally he had planned to go to Germany. So that's
Yes.
odd.
That absolutely. That is not where the Olympics were.
No.
It could be that she was just trying to piece together why he was where he was. And Sandra never told the police about the supposed Olympics plan during any of the initial investigation. She only mentioned it in a phone call with a reporter nearly 2 decades later. And even then, she didn't explain how she knew or why Blair ended up in Knoxville if Atlanta was the goal. In any case, the Olympics angle never became part of the official investigation. It was unknown to police for so long after the fact and didn't quite fit the evidence that we do have. As time passes, the likelihood of solving Blair's case dwindles. Any potential perpetrators are aging. Some might have died or gone to prison for other crimes. Memories fade, evidence degrades, but the cold case detectives haven't given up. They still maintain the files, and with each new generation of forensic tech, there's a chance, like DNA genealogy could
Mhm.
one day identify the source of that hair.
Would they be keeping it if it didn't have the root, do you think?
I think they would because it is the only piece of evidence they have.
Mhm.
So they could be waiting to see if maybe you can still pull DNA from it as technology advances. It's possible,
Interesting.
maybe. I mean, we never would have known in the 60s about DNA and they saved
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah. That's true.
one chilling aspect of this case is that Blair predicted his fate. He told people he was going to be killed, and then he was. And whether that was by people actually pursuing him or sheer tragic coincidences, his fear became true. And that's one reason this story sticks in the minds of everyone who hears it. It feels either like a self fulfilling prophecy or an ironic twist of fate, or it feels like we're really missing part of this puzzle. It has also left a lingering question. If Blair was right about someone trying to kill him, did that someone succeed? Or did Blair's own frantic actions put him in the path of a killer he would otherwise never have met? And to this day, we don't know the answer. All we have are theories, and there are plenty of those. With a case this confounding, it's no surprise that many theories have emerged over the years. Investigators have theirs, and so do armchair detectives on the internet. We've talked extensively about the sexual encounter having turned deadly because that is the theory that law enforcement favors. The evidence suggests that he might have fallen victim to a crime of opportunity, but then you come back to why leave the money? If
Yeah.
robbery was the intent, it's odd to leave thousands in cash and valuables behind.
Yeah.
But the theory is considered plausible by investigators because of what they have in front of them. Many wonder if Blair fell victim to a random killer, which would be a really tragic coincidence. He could have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The area that he was in back in the 90s wasn't the safest place at night. Theory posits that he could have been trying to hitchhike after leaving the hotel and encountered a random predator. This could be a violent criminal or even a serial killer passing through. There have been speculations connecting Blair's case loosely to other unsolved murders or known killers, but there's nothing concrete. If a serial killer or an opportunistic murderer crossed paths with Blair, the scene might look similar: a vicious attack for no obvious reason. The killer might not have cared about the money at all, explaining why it was left. And some people have pointed out that if Blair's death was an attempted robbery, it's just bizarre that nothing was taken, or at least everything wasn't taken. A truly random serial killer might kill for thrills and leave valuables behind. This case just has so many weird aspects that when you think something feels like it fits, it doesn't fully fit. It
Yeah.
fits a tiny bit, and then you're like, but what about this? Or what about that?
Yeah. The whole thing with the valuables being left behind, I think makes it really hard to think about the different possibilities because if it is a
Hmm.
robbery or a crime of opportunity, that whole situation, why wouldn't you take the valuables? That's
Why
the
wouldn't you take the
blaring,
valuables?
the blaring
Exactly.
alarm there. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly. But then when you think about if he was actually being hunted by somebody, that is odd that they managed to follow him from place to place. But that makes sense to leave the valuables because it might have been more targeted.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about that. Maybe he had some kind of data or something that they were looking for and they were searching his things and found it and left
Hmm.
everything else because they didn't care.
Exactly.
And when you were talking before about his coworkers from Germany, maybe he had something related to his work there that he wasn't
Hmm.
supposed to keep or he wasn't supposed to know about. Those
Right.
people you said did come back to Canada. Maybe they were
Hmm.
trying to get that information from him. I mean, you said it was a
Yes.
construction site though that he worked on, right?
Right. But
So maybe he had some kind of plans or something he wasn't supposed to
yeah,
have. I don't know.
maybe illegitimate money was going into that construction project and
Yeah.
he had found out about that, or
Or
I
maybe he had been
mean,
part of it and then
yeah,
was deciding he was going to tell somebody and they started coming
hmm,
after him.
possibly. What if he told somebody that he was going to take it to police, even if it implicated him too?
Yeah.
Maybe something like that. And maybe that's why you wouldn't want to get into it with family and friends.
Yeah. Yep. That's true too. It's
It
just
just,
so many,
yeah,
who knows?
yeah. And, logistically, it would be very hard to follow someone through multiple boarding crossings and flights without being tracked or without being noticed. And that's
On,
why, sorry, go.
okay. I wonder then why they didn't kill him in Canada because it had been a little while since he started
Yeah,
saying these things. Why? And maybe that is also part of that. Maybe he had the information and he was hiding it. They were trying to get that from him before doing something drastic, or they were just
possibly.
threatening him if you don't give us this, then we're going to kill you. It
And
could
then
be
when he
something like
fled, they
that.
followed.
Yeah.
I,
I don't know.
when they're watching, I mean, if he was being watched and they're seeing him clean out his savings, clean out his safety deposit box, that's absolutely evidence that he's planning to leave.
Hmm.
Maybe he didn't go to Germany because they saw him buy the ticket and he knew it'd be too easy to follow him. So he
Yeah.
decided to try the border crossing in ways that would be harder to follow. And along those lines, maybe Blair had witnessed something like a crime as opposed to knowing about it from his job, and someone was after him for what he knew. And then there really isn't anything that they need to take from him. There's no evidence of this in his known history, but we have no evidence of exactly what happened. So it's hard to
Yeah.
rule anything completely out.
It's all theories at this point.
Yeah, exactly. The lack of the theft does support the personal motive, though, more than the crime of opportunity. But then we come back to how did they know where he was and track him down so quickly?
Yeah.
Police never identified a concrete suspect in Blair's personal life who could have pulled this off. So it remains in the realm of not impossible, but not really any evidence to point to anything. It really just hinges on Blair's own statements that someone was out to get him, and he ended up dead in the exact time frame he feared he would. Investigators wonder if Blair's behavior was a result of mental illness that led him there. And this is a theory that overlaps with the others. his actions in the days before his death do look like someone having a mental health crisis or a severe paranoid episode. And we mentioned his family and his record show no history of mental illness, but that can come on in the 30s, especially if he was feeling high stress, or maybe that connects to knowing something he's not supposed to, witnessing something
Yeah.
he wasn't supposed to. As with any enduring mystery, there are some really far fetched theories that have circulated. And these range from notions that Blair was involved in some kind of international espionage or secret crime. Again, no evidence of this. There have even been suggestions of supernatural or occult involvement. Obviously, no evidence of either of those, but the weird details do invite wild speculation. Some have half joked that the case is so puzzling, maybe aliens or some scenario is to blame. Mostly just a tongue in cheek way of saying that it defies rational explanation. Another minor theory that pops up occasionally is, could Blair have died by accident or suicide and it only looked like a murder? The evidence pretty firmly rules this out. His injuries were too severe, and he did have like the defensive wounds we talked about,
Yeah.
plus the hair in his hand. And his death was officially ruled a homicide. One thing universally agreed on by everyone from detectives to anyone that really hears this case, Blair Adams' case is deeply, deeply baffling. It's not just a who done it, it's a why, it's a how done it, all rolled into one with perplexing clues at every turn. Blair Adams' story is the kind of case that haunts you. It's like a jigsaw puzzle where really half the pieces are missing. I think we say often that we're just missing one piece. This one feels like we're missing a lot of pieces.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
the ones you do have don't fit. They might belong to a different puzzle. We have this young man who was so frightened by an unknown threat that he goes on this cross country voyage, withdrawing his life savings, crossing borders, continents in a matter of days. He zigzagged from Canada to the US, trying to outrun something. Whether Blair was fleeing an actual person or demons in his mind, he ended up in harm's way.
What do you think? Do you think
Investigators,
he was running from something real? What are your thoughts?
possible. I do think it's possible. It, the fact that nothing was taken is just so odd, or that so much was left behind.
Mm-hmm.
But that could have just been because somebody walked by, potential witness. I mean, you can explain that away too. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I wonder if there was some type of threat. I I kind of feel like it could be both. Like there
Hmm.
was some kind of threat in Canada and he was running and possibly a crime of opportunity, but they got spooked and had to leave or couldn't carry. I don't know. But I feel like
I
there
do
was
think that makes
probably
a lot of
something.
sense.
Yeah, I feel like there was something that he was afraid of in Canada for some reason, but I can't figure out how it would be connected to Tennessee. But also, like you said, why didn't they take his valuables? Why was all of that just around him? Like, unless it was some kind of murder who was killing for thrills and they didn't care about the money. There's
Hmm.
always that possibility too. So I
Or,
feel
I
like it's
mean,
kind of that.
what if that woman's scream was somebody who came across as it was happening and
Yeah,
screamed and spooked them and they left?
it could be because they did say
That
it
would
as a
make
woman.
sense.
It
Hmm.
does make sense. I I do. I feel like it's kind of a mixture of several things. He could have been scared. He could have had some paranoia going on too because of what he was being threatened with back home for some reason.
True.
I don't know.
Yeah. Investigators like Sheriff Jones and Agent Davenport have spent years puzzling over this mystery, and Jones said that it was the most interesting and strangest case of his 38-year career. And you can bet a veteran with 38 years' experience has seen a lot, so that's telling. Davenport, the cold case investigator, wishes he could find a note in a jar that explains it all. He said, "If I could have one wish, somewhere in a damn mayonnaise jar, I could find a note that tells me what happened just so I'd know." And I think anyone who's heard Blair's story shares that wish. We're all looking for that figurative note in a bottle that lays out the truth. As of now, Blair's case sits in the unsolved files, awaiting that break.
Do you think it's solvable?
I think so. Cold cases have surprised us before, and all it takes is one person deciding they're done carrying a secret or some kind of forensic testing that can prove. I mean, if they
Yeah.
still had like his stuff and was able to get touch DNA off of it, that also could help narrow it down, even if there are other fingerprints on it from the construction workers. You could prove that they were working that day.
Yep.
No, I do think that someone out there knows what happened, though. But it's unfortunate that it's been 30 years now, because who knows if that person is even still alive, right? In the end, Blair Adams lived his last days in fear and tragically died really far away from all of his loved ones. It's a case that makes you wonder about the thin line between reality and perception. Unfortunately, if his fear was real, it didn't save him. And if it was unreal, it led him to real danger. There's a phrase from the Unsolved Mysteries episode about Blair that sticks with me. Could he have been running away from a killer or just running from himself? In the end, both answers feel equally haunting. If you have any information on the off chance that anyone listening has a lead, the Knox County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit would love to hear from you. Even the smallest detail could help them solve this case. Until then, the case of Blair Adams remains an enduring enigma, one that truly lives up to the name of the show because it leaves us all crime clueless. Any other thoughts or anything?
No, I think we covered it. Most of the things, I think there's so many questions, and I don't know. It's just that big why of why nothing was taken.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the
Exactly.
hardest.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
No.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Crime Clueless. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us. If you are looking for the resources that we use to create this episode, head over to our blog. You can find it on our website, crimeclueless.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We would love to hear what you think about this case. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Just search for @CrimeClueless. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would be so grateful if you would take a minute to rate, review, and share our podcast. Your support helps us reach more listeners and grow our community. You can find Crime Clueless on all streaming platforms. And as always, remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murders.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.